Hey y'all, welcome to the first sidebar of season 2. It doesn't seem like there's a lot to cover, but yet there is. First and foremost, thank you so much for continuing this journey with me. As I said before, this is a passion project, so I sincerely appreciate anyone who's willing to indulge in this multi-personality season of my life. A little sidebar to the sidebar. It's a running joke amongst my family and friends that I have 3 distinct, fully functioning personalities. Shandora is the worker bee. She goes to work and makes us all stay on task. Chinney is a bit of a homegirl. She's more likely to let her hair down than the others. Simone is the diva. She's absolutely indulgent in the best and worst of ways. My work is a hodgepodge of all of the best of me's. I'm a deep thinker and a person that actually enjoys studying and learning things. In writing, I research things to make sure that the facts align, even to the point of making sure that a song came out during that specific time, just for credibility. That's the Shandora in me. I love reading, writing, and fact-checking. Like, that actually appeals to me. I'm a bit of a nerd. But then you'll notice other things. And listening to some of the music in this podcast is mostly urban. In this season specifically, some of the subject matter is going to get hood, like really hood. That's the Chinney part of me, the part of me that's telling this story. Fun fact, my family calls me Chinney, by the way. I connect with some of these things because it's a part of our cultural experience, and I think we create a disservice by being afraid to tap into that sometimes. It's real life for many of the people that we know, maybe some of you too. The homegirl in me needs to do that. And then there's Simone with all of her extremes. Anything that ever happens for dramatic effect is always going to be Simone. In real life, that comes out in the form of lipstick, blush, and excessive pink stuff in my house. But in my work, it typically comes out in silent episodes, soft speech, or maybe some excessive quotes. My point is, my work, writing, this podcast, and some other things that are in mental queue are the crossover effects of how my personalities just merge together. My work often takes over my mind to the point that I write in silence so I can think about storylines. Sometimes I stay up writing or something wakes me up out of my sleep. So having you guys continue in this and have an appreciation for what it takes for me to scratch this itch means a lot. I sincerely appreciate you still being here. Okay, season 2. Ahem. Let's catch up. At the end of the last season, Ken had gotten locked up. Mom ran off with Grandma's insurance money, but Shelonda managed to get the house and a smaller insurance payout. She's 18 years old and working at a gas station. The season ends with a familiar face walking in that's going to become her new Ken. So let's talk about that for a second. Her new Ken. Without the benefit of revisiting the entirety of the relationship between Shelonda and Ken, let's think about the dynamics between them. Shelonda met Ken, and he eventually encompassed her entire being. So for her to say that he becomes her new Ken, we have to deduce that this new guy will become a major force in her life. Fair warning, this sidebar will feel a bit tedious, but I think the little details will matter with this one. There are a lot of little things that'll come back later, so I kind of want to touch on them. Okay, episode 1, My Guy. Episode 1 flashes forward 2 years, and Shelonda reflects on how life has been since Ken's incarceration and Grandma's death. She's working, in college, a homeowner, but life isn't easy for her. She has a free house, but she realizes that it has a slew of problems that Grandma has been patching up over the years. Even worse, she still feels guilty about how everything went down. She feels guilty about not having been there when Grandma dies. She feels guilty about Ken getting arrested, and she feels guilty about leaving Cassidy with Mom and Ron. To offset some of her guilt, she tries to fix up the house and does Cassidy's hair at the salon on Saturdays. The salon, the same salon that Sharon allowed her to come back to after she quit without notice. Sharon and Shelonda reconnected, but Shelonda doesn't look up to her in the same way that she used to. She mentions that she starts to see the cracks in Sharon's foundation. I find it hilarious that she says that Sharon's life isn't all peaches and cream. As the story goes along, you learn that that pun was extremely well placed. At any rate, their relationship has changed. Shelonda goes to the salon for work on a Saturday, but anxiously awaits an evening date. She chit-chats with Sharon, does Cassidy's hair, and you find out that she kind of keeps tabs on Cassidy by asking her questions to make sure that Ron isn't abusing her. And then she makes it home for a date. Shelonda showers, gets dressed, and leaves her hair for last. In hearing that little tidbit of info, you gather an appreciation for the amount of time that has passed. Shelonda says, in the 8 years since Sharon had given me my first rap, I hadn't deviated much. That's a lot of time. Shelonda was 12 when Sharon gave her her first rap. At the point of reflection, she's 20. They'd known each other for a minute. And then it was time. Shelonda finishes her look and gives herself one final look over. That's when we get the first indication that the new guy is someone that we've already been exposed to. She says that Ken was right to be concerned about him. Shelonda goes out and has a wonderful night out, which ends in amazing sex. She mentions that she had started to enjoy sex by that point, which Sharon had told her would happen once she realized what she liked. A point that probably wasn't lost on anyone, considering who teaches her what she likes. After all is said and done, she goes home the next morning, completely exhausted because Antonio had worn her out. Yeah, Sharon's Antonio. Sidebar to the sidebar. During the creation of the original books, Antonio was intentionally introduced to a very minimal degree. That was done to minimize the possibility of him coming to mind as a potential love interest in Book 2. At the end of Book 1, readers were left with the understanding that a familiar face walked into the gas station that would become Shelonda's new Ken. Having talked to several people between the end of Book 1 and the release of Book 2, most people thought that the new guy would be Omar or her old boyfriend Monty. I actually had someone tell me that they thought it would be Ron. Now that would have been something. But only one person said Antonio. These were amongst people that I had access to, of course. Either way, Antonio was really only referenced very briefly when Ken didn't want Shelonda living with Sharon, and for the most part he was rather forgettable, intentionally. But back to the story. Episode 2, it wasn't a choice. So now the cat's out of the bag and we know Antonio's the new guy. But how did that happen? Okay, so reflection is always the name of the game with Shelonda, so she flashes back to 2 years prior, basically the end of season 1. It's 1998, right after Ken gets arrested. Shelonda's working at the gas station and her car breaks down. Sharon, being the friend that she was, agrees to make sure that she gets to and from work. The first day Sharon drops her off, but at the end of the night, Antonio shows up to pick her up. The familiar face. He takes her home and that's that. Day 2, Sharon picks her up for work. But when it's time for her to go home, a woman comes into the gas station to retrieve her. That's when she meets Peaches and Cream for the first time. That's also when she realizes that Antonio has a relationship with the women. She anxiously spills the beans the next morning, only for Sharon to basically tell her to mind her business. She does just that and rides out the rest of the week. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Friday rolls around and it's time for Shelonda to pick her car up. Antonio goes to the mechanic with Shelonda. The mechanic quotes a price that's far more expensive than what's originally given, leaving Shelonda in a bind. Now, I know what some of y'all are probably thinking when y'all heard the numbers, but I remember life in the 90s. I said her check was $378, which was 2 weeks' earnings. That might have been a bit of a stretch. I probably should have made that girl's check a little more than that. But I remember getting checks that were easily $500 back then. Anyway, she was about to be left with $53 out of her check, but she had no other choice but to pay it. Shelonda opens her purse, prepared to pay. Antonio places his hand on top of hers, which she recognizes as a sign to cease action. He gives the mechanic $400 and they exit the shop. Once they're outside, he says, "People respect you differently when they know you got it." This is the first time that we catch a glimpse of that part of Antonio. That's also the point in time when "Where Do Broken Hearts Go" gets introduced between the two of them. Keeping in line with first, Antonio says, "You have an old soul, little girl. I like that." That becomes notable because little girl becomes a nickname that he uses for her after that point in time. Antonio gives Shelonda a business card and $200. He tells her to call him if she needs anything, and he elaborates on the word anything, which she feels is deliberate. She gets the same feeling that she had when she first met Ken at her locker, and she knows that something is there. Episode 3, Mixed Signals. The next day rolls around, and Shelonda goes to work at the salon. Late in the day, they get a walk-in. It's Cream. Cream walks past Sharon and asks Shelonda to do her hair. Shelonda completes the style and charges Cream $50. It doesn't implicitly state, but Antonio has sent the money for Cream's hairstyle. Without the benefit of knowing how much would be charged, he sent $250. Shelonda wonders why Cream didn't look inside. Actually, she thinks Cream is crazy for not looking. That will be a conversation for a future episode, and I hope I remember to elaborate on it in a sidebar, because it'll be important. Anyway, there's also a note that says, "I hope you bought yourself something nice. Let's go out tonight. Call me." Shelonda sticks the note in her smock and goes back to work. She thinks about Antonio's proposal on her way home, and you get a glimpse into how her mind works. Shelonda knows that she's wrong to even consider it, but she also sees the benefits just as she did with Ron and Ken. She says that he had spent $800 on her over the course of that week. And that's including the car, the $200 he gave her after getting the car fixed, and the extra $200 he gave her for Cream's hair. She wonders what she could get if she actually indulged in his advances. In the end, she settles on the facts that it's a bad idea and goes home. At some point, she pulls out the keepsake box, and the contents trigger a slew of memories. It doesn't give a detailed list in this episode, but for the purposes of this sidebar, let's recap what's in that box. There was the Monica cassette tape that was given to her by Tasha. The brooch that was given to her by Grandma. The same brooch that she wore to her first school dance where she looked like a rooster in a chia pet. Inside of a plastic sandwich bag was the positive pregnancy test that she had taken on the day that her mom tried to kill herself. The pregnancy test where she was pregnant by Ron. And there was a Bible that she had received from Grandma. There were also some random photos of her and Ken thrown into the mix as well. Sitting there with Ken's blanket that smelled like him because she'd randomly sprayed it with his cologne, I can imagine that a real person would be an emotional wreck. She puts the box away, and there's a knock at the door. It's important to note that Shelonda was prepared to confront Sharon about arriving unannounced and knocking like a madwoman. But upon opening the door and realizing that it was Antonio, she allowed him to enter unchallenged, even though she says that she typically feels that it's intrusive for people to arrive unannounced. Being further audacious, Antonio states that he showed up because she didn't call him, so he assumed that she preferred to stay in opposed to going out. Shelonda says nothing. Antonio shows up with Chinese food, ordered just the way she likes it. General Tso chicken with extra sauce, lo mein with no onions, and extra broccoli. If you pronounce General Tso chicken any other way, mind your business. We ain't even gonna go there. Anywho, Shelonda's impressed. Antonio ordered food for her when she lived with Sharon and always got it right. But she thought it was because she had dictated it to him. But at that point, she was forced to understand that he had been paying attention. She liked that because Ken hadn't ever taken the time to do that. They talk and ate. Shelonda realized that Antonio was good company, but when it was time for him to leave, he did just that. Shelonda was confused. Keep in mind that Shelonda had been exposed to predatory behavior. Having a man provide things for her had always come with conditions. When Antonio left without expressing a desire for anything else, she was confused. She assumes that she pegged the situation incorrectly and let it go out of her mind. Episode 4, The Possibilities. 1 week passes and it's Saturday again. And just like the week before, Cream shows up. Feeling like she had things wrong, Shelonda feels that there's less pressure this time. She does Cream's hair and there's another envelope. There's also another $250 payout and another note. Being the Shelonda that she is, she thinks it's probably innocent, based on the fact that she thinks she got it wrong the week before. But that time, the note is more direct and to the point. That note says, "I miss you and I want to see you. Are we staying in or going out?" Now, Shelonda knows that she wasn't tripping. I mean, you can miss a friend, but I think we can all agree that that felt a little personal. And Shelonda started thinking about the possibilities because Antonio's attention made her feel special. Why? Well, you find out in this episode that Antonio was 30 years old. Shelonda was 18. She feels that he's mature. He has spent time with her, so she feels that he must find her company to be mature and acceptable. That's specifically appealing because Sharon basically called her a child and told her that she had no idea about the complexities of adult relationships. Secondly, he already had 3 girlfriends. Shelonda felt that she must be worth it if he's willing to complicate his life to add another. Third, all of his women are beautiful. If he wants her, she must be beautiful too. And that all matters in the mind of someone who suffers in a self-esteem department. Shelonda lets the idea play around in her head a little bit. You get another glimpse into her mindset when she says, "The good friend in me saw her happiness and didn't want to be involved in anything that could possibly jeopardize it. But the jealous part of me wanted to be like her. Correction, I wanted to be her. I had to decide which one of those things was the strongest. I don't have to tell you which side I ended up on." Shelonda ends her shift and confidently calls Antonio to tell him that they're going out. They go to a seafood restaurant and we get another glimpse into Antonio's demeanor. He orders food for both of them, knowing what she'll like. They had a comfortable conversation and interaction, and when it was time to pay, Antonio gives the waitress what Shelonda feels is an excessive amount of money. It probably wasn't in real life. If they were at a seafood restaurant and he paid $300, it was probably less than what he was supposed to pay. But anyway, they left holding hands and she felt like it was the perfect date. And that leads to episode 5, Working Women. After the success of the date, Shelonda finds out that Antonio has taken them to a strip club. Though apprehensive, she goes inside. This is when we realize that Cream and Peaches are strippers and that Antonio owns the club. This is also when we get exposed to Cream niece, which I personally love just for the purposes of character development. You get a mental picture of who these people are. Cream is tall and slim with an amazing body. Based on earlier accounts, you know that she's flashy, well-dressed, and wears lots of jewelry. She has a diamond in her canine tooth. I imagine that she's probably from Louisiana or somewhere in the deep south. Peaches is short and thick, with a tiny waist and a big butt. She has a gold grill at the bottom. The women drink and snort coke, all of which is offered to Shelonda. She declines and mentions that she feels that they're weak because they have to resort to drugs to deal with their lives. Shelonda watches them and wonders how they're all Antonio's type, which somewhat gets broken down in the following episode. When Antonio resurfaces, they go into his office. She realizes that his business is in peril and offers her services. You start to see their playful banter start to take shape. He tells her that he needs to take her home and calls her little girl. She asks if he likes little girls and they both laugh. But to assure her that he considers her to be a woman, he places her on a desk and kisses her. It was a slow and sensual kiss. For the first time, we get a description of Antonio. Shelonda says Antonio was tall and thick. He wasn't fat, but more of the bulky, solid type. He was dark with dark brown eyes. He had thick black hair with deep waves. In that moment, I could see why women were drawn to him. Antonio was confident and assertive. He didn't mind making it known that he was in charge, and I liked that. Based on those descriptors, you know that Antonio is the exact opposite of what Shelonda typically goes for. Ken and Monty were athletic and of the paper bag brown variety. Antonio not so much, but she was attracted to his demeanor and the way he carried himself. Antonio took Shelonda home. He kissed her and never made a move otherwise. Episode 6, Not Going Anywhere. Shelonda starts hanging out at the club and she realizes that her opinions about stripper life was a bit off base. The reason why that was a silent episode is because I wanted you guys to pay attention. This is where we're introduced to some very important dynamics. This is where the word hierarchy first gets introduced, and that will play a major role in this story. You learn that Peaches and Cream aren't friends in the way that it's initially presented. In hanging out at the club, Shelonda gets somewhat conflicting accounts about how they came to be with Antonio. According to Peaches, they were once monogamous. Antonio caught a charge and she pulled the time for him. When she came home, Cream was in the picture and she never left. Cream agreed to some very limited points, but said Antonio wasn't ever faithful to Peaches. Cream is the one who lets it be known that whoever is at the top of the hierarchy is the person who gets the most. You also learn that Cream introduced Sharon to Antonio, which makes it obvious that Sharon and Cream have an unpleasant history of some sort. Shelonda starts to see the situation a little differently and deduces that Peaches is the only victim in the situation. Sidebar. I think it's very important to pay attention to the verbiage. If you notice, Shelonda always said, "I did as I was told," when she referenced situations with men in the past. Thinking all the way back to the beginning, when Ron told Shelonda to get up from her spanking and stand partially nude in front of him, when he told her to prepare dinner or participate in some sort of physical interaction with him, she always says that she did what she was told. Moving further along, when Ken told her that she was his girlfriend and to govern herself accordingly, when he made plans for her to break the rules, or when he spoke to her after abusive incidents, she always said, "I did as I was told." But in speaking of Antonio, the wording is completely different. If you notice, Shelonda says, "I did as he asked," or "I did as he requested." That little variation in wording means a lot because it's obvious that Shelonda views Antonio's interactions as requests opposed to demands. That contributes to her feeling as though she's experienced a different level of care. But moving along. A few weeks in, Shelonda's in Antonio's office doing some paperwork. He enters and locks the door, which is strange, but you learn that he has an agenda. Antonio starts kissing Shelonda and she begins to feel insecure. Keep in mind that she knows all 3 of Antonio's girlfriends, 2 of which she is seeing completely naked because they're strippers. They have amazing bodies, and here she is with her A-cup boobs. But Antonio makes her feel comfortable by telling her to just relax, and then he does his thing. Shelonda has her first official orgasm. Keep in mind that it had only happened once prior to that point, and it was purely accidental with Ken. But Antonio knew exactly what to do. And he knew that it was good at it, a fact that was reflected in the fact that he looked up at her and smiled as she reached her climax. And then one orgasm turned into two. Something that was assuredly impactful to someone who hadn't even enjoyed sex prior to that point. Even more impactful was the fact that he didn't attempt to have sex with her afterwards. He wanted to please her, and that was the night that she no longer had consideration for any of the other women. She knew that she wasn't going anywhere. So that's the end of this sidebar. The next episode is called Clownfish and Anemone. This is one of my favorite episodes. The relationships really start to take shape and the story starts to pick up at this point. It is about to get so good, y'all. We'll let some more build up and we'll discuss it on the next Sidebar with Chinney. Thank you so much for listening. Make sure to follow Chinney Tells a Story on Facebook and Instagram. I'd love to hear from you. If you're interested in purchasing books by Shandora Warren, they're all available on Amazon in ebook, paperback, and some in hardback formats. Thank you for helping me to create the world that I want to see. Oh yeah, you're welcome. Shine, little girl.